Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch. I'm Mitch, and today we'll be talking about a paradox preparing to succeed by preparing to fail. This information comes from the course Mind Shifting Resilient Mindsets. And let me just get the QR code up there for the next time this course is being offered. The course is going to be offered starting in April 14th. It's 6 2-hour sessions, and it's designed to set you up to succeed despite fallbacks, failures, and obstacles. And we'll also give you tools to coach others that you work with to succeed as well. And as I mentioned, the course is April 14th. We're going to cap registration at 85 people, and we're currently just coming up to 60 people. So if you're interested, go to the QR code and register. What we're going to be talking about today is first, I'll give an introduction to the topic, and we'll talk about expectations and frustrations. And then there's going to be really five parts. First, we're going to talk about the reality of complexity. And then second, resourcefulness and probes. Third, we'll be introducing the OODA Loop. Fourth, we'll be talking about examples in action. And then fifth, we're going to have a conclusion. As we talk about expectations, our brains play tricks on us. We look at a problem and immediately we think we know what to do. We expect it to be a linear path, like I'm going to do A and then B is going to happen. And our brains really crave certainty. But the frustration is that life rarely works that way. And then when things don't go according to plan, our survival instincts kicked in and we start blaming. We blame bad luck, we blame idiots, or we blame ourselves. So, our goal for today is we're going to stop trying to be perfect and we're going to start learning to be resourceful. Instead of preparing to succeed, we're going to prepare so that after we do something, we get the information we need so that we can adjust or adapt and then decide what to do next. And this leads us into one, which is the reality of complexity. You know, it's why simple solutions fail. The core problem is that we fail because we treat complex problems as if they were simple, as if we're sure we know what the cause is and what the effect is. But let's look at the nature of complexity. First of all, there's really four parts that I look at as components of complexity. First of all is novelty. Complex problems are often new or unique situations. We can't just copy what worked last time. And then second, there's the butterfly effect. Okay, in complex systems, small actions can have massive consequences. A single raised eyebrow in a meeting or a sign at the dinner table can change the entire trajectory of a relationship. And then there are unintended consequences. When we take an action, people change their behavior, and then their changing behavior changes the whole system. And then it needs a different type of action. So we might try to fix a problem, and we end up creating a new one. And then there's another issue with our own brains, which is the fourth, the pattern trap. Our brains are wired to see patterns even where none exist. We think we see a cause and effect link, but in complexity, you can only really understand what happens in retrospect. You can't know what's going to happen in the future, but when you look back, you'd say, "Oh, of course, this is what happened because when I did this, that was destined to call that." But we only really know that in hindsight. And because of those four things, the novelty, the butterfly effect, unintended consequences, and the pattern trap, the old rules just don't work. So, very often when we look at solving problems, we think we can bring in an expert. But in a complex problem, experts can't be the ones that drive. In a complicated situation, like maybe building something, building a school or building a building or building a bridge, you're best off listening to an expert. In a complex situation like changing a culture, the experts don't know the answer because the answer doesn't exist yet. And so, You talk to an expert, you put an expert inside, an expert is going to do what they've always done. An expert is like the hammer where every problem is a nail. And then another reason why the old rules don't work is the limited benefit of data. In a complex system, more data or a deeper analysis doesn't yield better results. You can't predict a solution in advance when the future is unknowable. And then the third reason why the old solutions don't work is that we can't be bound to a fix, to one solution, when we know no known solution is likely to work. Instead, decisions that most likely lead to success involve though it has to involve those who are involved in the situation, and has to be in the form of things that we're going to try, not things that we know that are going to work. So we've kind of touched on a little bit on complex situations where it's novel. There's a butterfly effect. We can't predict, and we've touched on complicated situations where maybe an expert is, or almost definitely an expert, and data analysis is going to be valuable. Or simple situations where there's one solution. And let me just turn on so I can see chat. Um, and Let me just try, three scenarios, and maybe some of you can try to enter some of these in the chat, or if you're watching the archive, you can write some of these down. But I'm going to give three typical scenarios, and then I want you to type into the chat or think about whether you think the problem is simple, which means there's a clear rule that's going to solve it; complicated, which means that you need data or an expert, and there might be more than one solution; or complex, meaning that there's no answer yet. So, situation number one: a student shuts down in class, or a student is habitually late, or maybe a student is not doing their homework. Is that simple, complicated, or complex? And while you're thinking about it or typing in, let me move on to a second situation. A coworker, or maybe even your boss, blocks your project or disagrees vehemently. Now, is the solution to that problem simple? Something pretty much anybody could know, and there's a rule. Is it complicated, or is it complex? And then the third situation is, let's say your spouse forgets a chore or makes a mistake. Again, is that simple, complicated, or complex? And as you're thinking about those three, let me kind of dive into each one. Okay, so let's look into the school example to start off with. Okay, so the school example is a student shuts down in class, or maybe a student is habitually late, or maybe a student is not doing their homework. If we think that this is a simple problem, we're going to use a standard best practice. We're the expert, we know what to do. We're going to probably reward or punish the student. But actually, this is generally a complex situation. Most things involving people are complex. The student is going to react to the punishment by protecting their ego and shutting down further. These are, unintended consequences. So the expert solution is pretty much doomed to fail because the student's behavior is dynamic, not static. Now, school, it's a society institution. Basically, I'd say any situation in our society where we see something is wrong and we know what we need to do to solve it, we're treating a complex problem as if it had a simple solution. And that problem could be anything, whether it's immigration or violence control or racism, or the people who vote for Republicans or the people who vote for Democrats. None of these are simple. Let's now dive into the work situation. So in this situation, the the coworker, or maybe even your boss, blocks your project or just disagrees vehemently. So, uh, and I'm looking at some of the answers here. So, the students is complex. Yep. The boss, complicated. The spouse, simple. Okay, so that's interesting. And the second one, complex, also complicated, and also simple. Okay. So I would say that that first problem is really a complex issue. Let's look at the context of a coworker. Okay. A coworker, maybe even your boss, blocks your project or disagrees vehemently. The simple solution is like maybe you rely on logic or data. Like you say, okay, I know I can convince them if I just show them the analysis, they'll agree. Or if it's a coworker, maybe I can just tell them that we're going to be doing this, and I can kind of, if I'm louder than them, I'm going to convince them to go along with me. The complex reality is that logic fails because this is an emotional human response. You, your push for logic makes the other person feel unheard, so they're going to dig in and they're going to change their behavior rather than come up with the best result. They're going to change their behavior to oppose you because they're going to feel attacked. You're seeing a pattern of stubbornness, which where there might actually be fear or status anxiety or some other reason that you have no idea. So again, this is a situation, if you think about it, in many situations that involve people, is complex. And then let's look at a situation in personal life. Your spouse forgets a chore or makes a mistake. And well, so here's what happened to me. Okay. So I guess about 2 months ago, we were in Mexico and we were outside of Puebla in Zapotitlan, Salinas, and we found what I think is the best salt in the world. This salt, it comes from salt springs. It's left out to evaporate, and when you taste the salt, you taste all these different minerals. And so, I bought a kilo, 2.4, 2.2 pounds of this salt to bring back from Mexico, and, like, it dawned on me that maybe this wasn't the smartest thing to do as I'm going through customs. It's like how many people are bringing a kilo of white powder from Mexico in the United States. But I got through, everything was okay. But this salt is much stronger than most salt. And so when you use it in cooking, you have to use about half as much salt as you would from the commercial table salt that we're all used to using. Well, inevitably, my wife puts in too much salt. And so I criticize her. It's like, okay, she put in too much salt. I just have to tell her that she put in too much salt, right? Well, I'll just say that didn't work. Okay. When you criticize your spouse to fix a behavior, when or when your spouse thinks that you've made let's turn that around a little bit. Let's say your spouse thinks that you've made a mistake or on them and they criticize you. How many of you then will fix your behavior without getting defensive? I certainly don't. And so it's the same thing when we criticize or we offer to fix the behavior of our spouse. So the complex reality is that, it's the same thing as when they criticize or correct us. The butterfly effect kicks in, and the small comment ruins the evening, triggers a fight about something from 5 years ago, damages trust. So you tried to fix a small problem and created a large one. And so, in each of those situations, because we're dealing with people and people aren't predictable, they're really complex situations. So, the question is, the second, moving on to the second part is like resourcefulness and probes. Like, what do we do? And one of the keys is shifting into what we've called sage mode in mind shifting. We need to stop looking for the perfect solution or the perfect plan and start looking for information. We need to move from solutions that are we expect to solve the problems to probes, things that will give us information. And the concept of the probe is something that we can do or something that we can say that is safe to fail. So even if it fails, it's not going to make the situation worse. You're trying to say something or do something specifically to see how the system responds. And that's kind of like preparing for fail. You're actually expecting that your first attempt isn't going to solve the problem and might not work. And that's okay. And, one of the people who really understood this was Dwight Eisenhower. And he said this right before D-Day, that plans are worthless, but planning is invaluable. So we should be planning, but we shouldn't like assume that the plan is going to solve the problem. We're going to use the results of our action as feedback or data, not as a fail succeed verdict on our worth. And moving into the third section, the core tool of this that I use is something called the OODA Loop. The OODA Loop, spelled OODA, was created by a fighter pilot named John Boyd. It stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. Let's look at those step by step. Okay. So, step one, observe. That's where we look around, we gather information. We're not judging anything, but we're looking for anomalies, things that didn't fit our expectations. In complexity, we may be looking for some weak signals. Weak signals really matter. Step two is orient. Orient is really the most important step. This is where mind shifting happens. The goal of the orient step is to come up with a few different possible actions we could try and what we think would happen if we tried them. Orientation, that orient step, it's filtered by our previous experience, what we already know how to do, the information we know, the information that we gathered when we observed. It's filtered by our culture. It's filtered by our ability to innovate. And then, one of the things that's crucial is that if our orientation is stuck in our limbic or survival brain, where we're blaming or fearing something, we're going to misinterpret the data, and we must orient with curiosity. I wonder what's going to happen. We must orient from a sage mindset. And because this is such an important step, we're going to focus on just the orient process in detail in next week's Monday Mind Shifting with Mitch. So if you're interested in this, tune in next Monday, also at 4 o'clock Eastern, and we're gonna really dive into the orient step. That's step two. Step three is decide. This is where we pick an action. And again, we're not looking for a perfect action, but we want a hypothesis. Okay. Maybe we're going to choose even more than one action, but we're going to decide on some probe, something small enough that if it fails, it's not going to destroy the system. It's safe to fail. And then step four is act. We execute the action in order to see what happens. And then the loop is that it doesn't end with our action. We immediately go back to observe, like, okay, how did we do? What were the results? Uh, what changed? Uh, how did the other people react? How did the system change? How did the person react? And then we use that information back in the next orient step to come up with some more new possibilities. And we operate this inside this loop continuously until we reach some end state. If you think about it, athletes, elite athletes, they do this all the time. Like in baseball, you know, a typical at bat in baseball lasts about 4 pitches. So after each pitch, the catcher, the pitcher, and the hitter are all using OODA loops. What was the pitch last time? What did the batter do? What do I think the pitcher is thinking? What's the most likely pitch the next time? And how can I tell that quickly? How did the batter react last time? And what could I throw that will confuse him the next time? And so on and so on. So they're constantly, looking at the new information. How did the other person react? What did they do? What should I prepare for this time? Okay, ready for the next pitch. And the pitcher's OODA loop, the batter's OODA loop. They're ready. The next pitch comes, and then they do it again. And again, on average, a bat lasts four pitches. So let's go back through those examples uh, that we used before. So let's revisit school. The shutdown student. Okay, we what we observed is that the student put their head down. Okay, what we orient is okay. So one thing is that I could just treat them as lazy. Okay, but that's really simple judgment. So what is it that I really want to do in the okay? And I might say, something. What I really want to do is I need to call him out, or I need to punish him. Okay, uh, or or a different orientation might be, his action is telling me something. How can I get his attention without making him retreat into defensiveness? And uh, I'd warrant that that would be a more productive way of coming up with solutions in the orient step. So So we might come up with like a small probe. Like, for example, we might say, one thing we could say to the student is, "What? Are you too stupid to follow this?" Okay, that would be, that would be one way of looking at it. Or another thing we could be thinking of, like, what's something that might unobtrusively get their attention? Okay, like, maybe I could say something like, "John, you've solved many problems in the past. Let me give you an example and ask for your opinion." Now, a statement like that might be one that could give you information that you can use to determine the next thing that you need to say or do, or that you could say or do, in order to have the students start paying attention again. And so you would come up with a few different things that you could do, or a few different things that you could say. You figure out which one or ones aligned with what you wanted to do. You decide on one. You'd act on it. You'd take a look at the results, and and you go through that OODA loop until whatever the situation is, it resolved itself. And then revisiting the coworker conflict. Okay, you're presenting your plan, and a coworker crosses their arms, and then they go defiant. Okay, and your survival brain would immediately want to argue facts or strike out at the other person. But in the orient step, you say, well, wait a minute. I mean, I want to come up with a few different things. So you realize, like, more data isn't going to solve this, and then you realize, something, over the long term, I need to work with this person in order to succeed. And so you might decide to use motivational interviewing, and you might come up with some questions that would guide them. Like, one question might be, I'd like to understand your perspective. What are the risks you see here? Or a question might be, I see that you are skeptical, or you doubt, what are a couple things that you think that might work? And so you're building you might come up with a couple things that might build a conversation. And in the loop, uh, you would decide on one of them, you would say it, you'd observe the results, and then you'd use that information to come up with the next thing that you do. And eventually, you try to build rapport and come up with something that you both could do, moving forward. And then, personal life with the spouse, some chore isn't done, or a chore wasn't done right, or if she put too much salt, or he put too much salt into the food, and you feel your anger rising. And then you recognize the butterfly effect, rather. So you think, oh, geez, if I attack now, I'm going to ruin the day, or I'm going to ruin the weekend, or I'm going to, how can I shift into sage mind? So in the orient step, you're thinking, okay, from a sage mind, what's some tiny experiment? What's something that I could say that just makes a connection, and then I can decide what to do based on the reaction. And so I might say something like, I'm feeling stressed about this, or gee, I'm feeling that this is a little bit salty. Or a third thing that we might say is, I really like the taste of that Mexican salt we brought back, and just leave it at that. And so you would pick, out of those three or four or five different things that you could say. Personally, I think I would be more likely to get results if I just said, I really like the taste of that Mexican salt. And as a matter of fact, what's interesting is that I did try that, because the spinach that we had was too salty. And so I tasted it, and I was immediately thinking, there's too much salt in here. But then I felt, something, what if I just say, and what I said is, I really like the taste of this Mexican salt. And what she says, yeah, the salt's really good, but I think I used too much. And so, like, that was much better coming from her than if I had said it. So then, the loop is, did what I say worked? Are we still in rapport? Are we still connected? What should I do next? What should I say next in order to live better together and not just try to win the fight? And so, just summarizing these interactions, we all get frustrated when our linear plans fail. So I want you to think, maybe some of you in the audience, you can think of one situation right now, maybe some personal or professional situation where you feel stuck, or maybe you tried something and it didn't work. So in the chat, just type a few words about that feeling, or the topic. For example, The student wasn't motivated, or I had an argument with my spouse, or I'm feeling burned out, or something like that. Um, so you can type something in the chat, or just think of something, and then think about that issue where you're stuck. And it's most likely that the thing that you're stuck on is complex. It's not going to be so simple. It's not something that can just be solved by an expert. It's something nobody really knows the answer to, which means stop looking for the right answer. Okay. We talked about moving from solutions or reactions to probes, or safe to fail experiments. So, I'd like you to make a pact. Okay. And that is, as you think of this thing that where you're feeling stuck, why don't you just think about, gee, what is it that I really want to do? And what are three or four things that I could do or say? And then choose one of them, observe it, with the purpose of expecting that it's not going to completely solve the problem, but it's going to give you some information so that you can come up with the next thing that you're going to say. So just kind of like as a summary, probes are that instead of doing something that on the surface addresses the situation, but actually might make a situation worse because it doesn't get to the root of an issue, use OODA loops. OODA loops allow us to respond in ways that give us information. We stay resourceful. The other parties don't get defensive. And in many cases, we find ways to collaborate. Um, we succeed by preparing that we're not going to succeed, by preparing to fail, meaning we prepare to run small experiments or probes, knowing that they're probably not going to work, but that we're going to do them so that we can learn what actually affects the system. And so we can use the OODA loop to process that failure into wisdom. And my call to action this week is for each of you to identify one complex problem. It could be with a student, a coworker, a spouse, a friend, um, somebody you're having a relationship with. Stop looking for an expert or simple solution. Come up with a couple probes and try one probe that's designed to give you information and do no harm. Watch what happens, and then come up with your next probe. And understand that this is just a tiny slice of what's in that Resilient Mindsets for Long-Term Success course that's going to be starting on April 14th. So you can try the QR code on your screen if you want to register for that course. And thank you all for joining Mind Shifting Monday with Mitch. Hope to see you on a future session, like next week's, when we look into the orient step, which is like the key to making decisions in complex situations. And I'm going to sign off for this week. This is Mitch. Keep mind shifting, and hope to see you next Monday. Ciao.